Good morning and welcome to the 2020 Virtual Protecting New York Summit. I'm John Lentz, City and State's Editor-in-Chief. I'm pleased to welcome everyone today. This is a very timely discussion. Public safety has always been a critical policy issue, and especially now as it relates to two major challenges confronting American society: the coronavirus pandemic and racial disparities in the criminal justice sphere. We'll hear from key experts and officials throughout the afternoon today, starting with our keynote speaker. But first, briefly, I'd like to thank the sponsors of today's event. Our sponsors are Wrap Technologies, Data Miner, AppDim, Catholic Guardian Services, Conduit Transportation Solutions, Microsoft, and Uncork. I'll now turn things over to Peter Bailey, the Chief Strategy Officer at Data Miner, who will introduce our keynote speaker. Peter, over to you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Peter Bailey, Chief Strategy Officer of Data Miner, and it's a pleasure to be here. Data Miner is the world's leading AI platform that detects the earliest signs of high-impact events and emerging risks from publicly available information. Our First Alert product for the public sector allows government clients to receive the earliest indication of breaking news so that they can respond quickly to public safety emergencies and events as they're happening. Data Miner, the company's roots are here in the heart of New York City, with our offices headquartered in Midtown, and many of us have friends, family, and colleagues working and living here as well. And that's why we are always proud to support the NYPD for the sacrifices they make every day to protect New York City, its people, and we're grateful for their service. It's also why I'm honored to be here to introduce today's keynote speaker, First Deputy Commissioner Benjamin Tucker. Deputy Commissioner Tucker began his law enforcement career with the NYPD over 50 years ago as a police trainee. He became a police officer in 1972 and was promoted to sergeant in 1987. After serving 22 years with the NYPD, he continued his public service as a senior executive under Mayor Ed Koch. Several promotions later, in 1995, he was appointed Deputy Director of Operations in the Office of Community-Oriented Policing Services at the U.S. Department of Justice. In 2009, he was nominated by President Barack Obama and confirmed by the U.S. Senate as the Deputy Director for State, Local, and Tribal Affairs within the White House Office of National Drug Control Policy. In 2014, he returned to the NYPD as Deputy Commissioner of Training and was subsequently sworn in as the 43rd First Deputy Commissioner. Throughout his extensive career, Deputy Commissioner Tucker has seen how policing in New York and around the world has evolved. Today's law enforcement personnel must navigate modern threats and keep up to date with the latest technologies and methods of ever-changing communication. Tucker understands the impact modern technology has on the city and its potential to equip officers with real-time information so they can act quickly and maintain peak performance. With his unique blend of law enforcement, criminal justice policy expertise, and academic experience, Tucker knows that keeping the city, its people, and personnel safe is of utmost importance. Please join me in welcoming First Deputy Commissioner of the City of New York, Benjamin Tucker.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm honored to be your keynote speaker for the annual Virtual Protecting New York Summit, hosted by City and State. I want to thank City and State for the invitation and also thank Peter Bailey for his introduction. Thank you very much, Peter. Convening this summit couldn't be more timely. It brings together a cadre of industry executives, public sector leaders, and academics for a discussion on how best to keep New Yorkers safe. The lineup of panelists will have the opportunity to bring their ideas and collective wisdom to bear on what New York's future security strategy should look like. But let me set the context for the discussion. Since 2014, the NYPD has been engaged in the most comprehensive reform process in its 175-year history. Our reform momentum has been relentless, in the pursuit of continuous improvement, such as the following: an innovative neighborhood policing plan that expands the opportunities for police and communities to work together, an array of targeted strategic crime-fighting initiatives and operational changes, the complete transformation of the recruit and in-service training, the remaking of renewal of the department's technological infrastructure, far-reaching changes to use of force policies and procedures, a fairer, more efficient disciplinary process, 1,300 new officers hired to staff neighborhood policing, and a counterterrorism team called the Critical Response Command. New technological assets for officers like smartphones and tablets, the adoption of body-worn cameras, to date, the largest application of this technology in the world. We also strengthened our counterterrorism strategy, tripling our capacity to deploy dedicated, highly trained personnel for site protection, counterterrorism, and heavy weapons response. We are facing a new and daunting challenge, but it's worth reminding ourselves that the NYPD and this city have certainly faced challenges and challenging times in the past. The high crime years of the late 60s through the early 90s come to mind. Those years also brought civil unrest, the assassination of Dr. King and others, the blackout of 1977, the crack epidemic of the 1980s, and the most murders ever recorded in the city during the early 90s, and of course, the horrific events of 2001, 9/11. Fast forward to today's times. What's different? The nearly simultaneous succession of the current events. COVID-19, which hit the NYPD especially hard, with over 7,000 of our members infected and 46 lives lost to date. In early April, nearly 20% of our uniformed workforce was out sick. The killing of George Floyd and the civil unrest that has followed, including some protests that morphed into full-fledged riots. Thousands of officers had to be detailed to the protests for weeks on end. The budget crisis facing the city, which may yet rival the fiscal crisis of the 1970s, when the city was forced to lay off 5,000 officers, among other city personnel. And the enormous pressure to reform and reimagine policing in light of the protests and a nationwide concern about police practice and policy. This reform agenda not only about policing, it's not about policing itself, it's about other systemic issues that affect policing and the policing environment, like housing, healthcare, education, homelessness, and drug addiction, to name a few. It's a very broad, complex set of issues. And for purposes of this discussion, I will focus on how we in the NYPD have changed. Recently, Governor Cuomo issued an executive order on policing reform. As you are about to hear, we are well ahead of this mandate and have been for many years. We have been deliberate in our focus on training, technology, tactics, and terrorism, as well as building community trust. To support our initiatives, especially the neighborhood policing plan, it was imperative that we redirect and reinvigorate our overall training platform. In some cases, we had to go back to basics, and in some cases, we had to break new ground. But in every case, we sought to rethink what we were doing to train and develop the officers and civilian support staff that would maintain our position as a leader in 21st century policing. Our state-of-the-art police academy, the first new NYPD training facility in 50 years, has positioned us to accomplish this goal. The Academy's 730,000 square foot main gym is the size of a football field. The mock environments include 2 precincts, convenience stores, a subway station, a bank, marked and unmarked police vehicles on streetscapes, all to facilitate expanded scenario-based training and build and renew perishable skills. A number of smart classrooms, an 800-seat auditorium and a library, as well as a conference center, all support our academic platform. Since its opening in January 2015, the Academy has played a pivotal role in the education of our 55,000 uniformed and civilian personnel, as well as citizens from across the city. We created the first field training academy for graduates in more than a decade. We launched the Community Partner Program to build trust, mutual respect, and shared responsibility with community volunteers who help new academy graduates adapt to their first field assignments. In direct response to the tragic death of Mr. Eric Garner in July of 2014, we gave 22,000 officers 3 days of in-service training instruction in police ethics, de-escalation, tactics, and the nobility of their chosen police profession. We launched the Neighborhood Policing Program, featuring steady sector officers and neighborhood coordinating officers as part of the first major restructuring of the patrol model in decades. This system was designed to foster interaction and trust between local police officers and communities where they work. Terrorism, of course, is always a top priority and a concern. We established the Critical Response Command and deployed 520 dedicated, highly trained personnel for site protection, counterterrorism, counter-surveillance, and heavy weapons response. We also formed the 700-officer Strategic Response Group. By consolidating 8 borough-based squads, they deploy to precincts and zones to suppress street violence and to citywide mobilizations and major crowd control events. Between these units and our emergency services unit, we effectively tripled the number of officers available to respond to an active shooter or other terrorist attack here in the city. And while we are on the subject of terrorism, we also established a special unit to respond to hate on the internet, monitoring and investigating potential cases. We are always concerned about someone coming to New York with a hate group agenda or someone who lives here attempting some form of a terroristic act. You are all familiar with the mantra after 9/11, and it continues to be applied today. If you see something, say something. If you see something or hear something that's odd, say something. Tips from everyday New Yorkers have proven invaluable, and we continue to fight our hateful acts and terrorist-related plots in this city. While we haven't had a significant number of hate conspiracies here, like the recent plot to kidnap the governor of Michigan, we have been instrumental in assisting a number of other jurisdictions and the FBI with some of these cases. In 2013, just prior to the current administration, the New York City Council passed bills authorizing a bias-based profiling law and the appointment of an Inspector General for the NYPD. 2 months later, a federal judge ruled that the department's previous use of reasonable suspicion stops, or stop and question and frisk, had resulted in widespread Fourth Amendment violations. The judge appointed a federal monitor who was charged with implementing and auditing NYPD reforms. We continue working with the monitor and the plaintiffs' counsels to satisfy compliance with the court-mandated remedial measures. We have gone to great lengths to convey our commitment to protecting the citizens of New York without compromising their civil rights. We are the most scrutinized agency in the nation, perhaps, with 5 district attorneys, 2 United States attorneys, the Commission to Combat Corruption, the State Attorney General, an IG devoted to the NYPD, as well as the Civilian Complaint Review Board and the Federal Monitorship. Beyond our work with the Monitor and the other entities I just mentioned, the department has engaged in a broad, unprecedented reform affecting wide areas of the NYPD policy and practice. We instituted implicit bias training, which has accomplished what we intended it to enhance and reinforce our officers' awareness that biases may influence their decision-making and how they can exercise their discretion. We want officers to be reminded of their possible biases, and as they come into work, engage in their daily encounters with our citizens. We've implemented more than 70 reforms since 2014. All have made a lasting impact on the department, but I'd like to highlight just a few. The Office of Collaborative Policing was established to foster collaboration with public and private partners to enhance public safety and police services. This was a sea change for a department that was famously resistant to outside influences. Our new field training program was established for new police academy graduates. Newly assigned officers patrol with veteran field training officers, known as FTOs. Field training replaced the Operation Impact, which sent new academy graduates into high crime areas with no field training. The impact zones drove unnecessary stops and limited new officers' exposure to the critical aspects of policing. The Community Partner Program brought in community volunteers who work with new officers to assist them in learning about their new neighborhood assignments. As a result of marijuana arrest policy reform, criminal court summonses are now authorized for low-level marijuana offenses in lieu of arrest. Our body-worn camera program was initiated in 2015 in the most complex procurement process in the history of the department. We now have 24,000 members of the service wearing body-worn cameras, with more than 10 million videos and counting. We've enhanced in-service training, expanding field-level training with increased focus on de-escalation, ethics, and physical control tactics that protect both officers and subjects. We've initiated stop and frisk reforms in all NYPD commands. In 2011, there were 694,000 stops conducted, and 80% of those stopped were young black men. We ended last year with roughly 13,000 stops. Our Risk Management Bureau works collaboratively with the Federal Monitor, the Inspector General, the Law Department, the courts, the public, and our NYPD bureaus to develop, implement, and audit the required reforms. During a major restructuring of our patrol bureau, we created the neighborhood policing model. This new patrol model was implemented to increase community contact and enhance collaboration, engagement, and trust. The model has introduced steady sector officers and neighborhood coordination officers. Advances in technology have provided every officer with a smartphone and every patrol vehicle with a tablet. Officers have the most up-to-date information in real time in their hands. They can see their calls for service even before the radio dispatcher broadcasts them. They also receive immediate updates, such as matters related to terrorism or intelligence and wanted subjects. We developed crisis intervention training, designed in collaboration with mental health professionals to teach officers how to better approach and gain voluntary compliance from substance abusers and emotionally disturbed persons. One of the most important relationships we are building is with our young people. Through our newly instituted Youth Coordination Officers, or YCOs, the YCOs take a holistic and collaborative approach. They fight youth crime, work with family court, and other aspects of the juvenile justice system, and help refer troubled young people and their families to the appropriate services. They also assist in the development of community activities and facilities for each precinct's youth population. The NYPD and the Police Foundation developed Options, Learn to Earn program. It's a 6-week summer program focusing on career development that provides stipends for urban youth. Learn to Earn offers a dynamic set of remote workshops designed to engender practical experience and job skills in such areas as community policing, finances, and communications. I could take the entire session talking about our reforms. My hope is that I've given you a more detailed understanding of how committed the NYPD is to maintaining strong relationships and building trust with the many communities throughout our city. In the 1830s, Sir Robert Peel, who founded London's Metropolitan Police Service, the first modern police department, outlined 9 principles of law enforcement that greatly influenced our goal of building trust, community trust. And one of these principles holds that the police are, at all times, should maintain a relationship with the public that gives reality to the historic tradition that the police are the public and the public are the police. This was true 190 years ago, and it is no less true today. Thank you again for the opportunity to talk with you, to share some of the information. As you continue on the panel discussion, with the panel discussions about the essential topic of protecting New York, know that we in the NYPD appreciate your support. City and state has been very gracious with hosting this conference. It helps us to uphold our unwavering commitment to keeping New York City safe. I wish you all the best. Please take care and stay healthy during these challenging times.
Thank you, First Deputy Commissioner. I think we have time for just a couple quick questions for you before we go to our first panel. You did enumerate a number of reforms and efforts made. One thing you mentioned was a fairer disciplinary process. Now, despite what all you've said, there are some critics that argue that police officers face little or no punishment for infractions or even abuse. We've seen recent reports about the lack of mask wearing, nothing known being done on that front. The response to protests in recent months as well, arguably overly aggressive with little recourse, little punishment. I guess most prominently probably the years-long delay when it comes to Daniel Pantaleo in the death of Eric Garner. How would you answer these critics?
Well, I guess on the with respect to Daniel Pantaleo, I mean, to suggest that somehow we were, minimal punishment was meted out, that's just simply not the case. You may recall that we tried him in our administrative trial process, and eventually the recommendations from the trial judge, as well as my recommendations to the police commissioner, were termination, and which is exactly what happened. He was terminated from his position as a police officer in the NYPD. With respect to discipline, we took great pains, and when I first stepped into this particular role, to really look at our disciplinary process. We gave it a thorough review, and the goal, one of the goals in particular, was to make the process more fair for police officers, but also to make sure and reinforce the notion to all of our officers that those of you who engage in conduct that is prohibited will be subject to discipline. Our disciplinary process does exactly that. We hold people accountable, and we brought in a panel three-person panel last year to take a look at our disciplinary process. In fact, in response to some of the critics, to get an independent take on just how effective and whether or not our disciplinary process is effective in meting out punishment to officers who violate the rules. They concluded that they believed our disciplinary process was robust. We did make they made 13 recommendations with respect to the process that they thought would add value and improvements, and we adopted every one of those recommendations, and every one of those has been implemented and finished. We completed that just in recently by hiring the person who is going to be the liaison to the public and the auditor of our actions with respect to discipline. And so I would say that that we, in that regard, have made tremendous progress.
Sure. Another kind of criticism that's come from a different part in the city. Business leaders and some commentators have complained about rising crime in the city. You yourself talked about, however, there were the high crime years, reaching a peak in the early 90s. And relative to that, crime rates historically remain quite low. What is the right way to view the safety of the city at this moment?
Well, I think, first of all, as I mentioned in my remarks, and you just commented on it, crime is as low as it's ever been. I mean, we brought crime down as this administration began. Through all the efforts and the reforms that I referenced, we did everything we could to focus on areas that needed to be addressed, and certainly crime was one of them. So while crime was coming down in the prior administration, we were able to continue to have crime come down without the numbers-driven policing, if you will. So we took an approach that we needed to focus on that tiny percentage, 2 or 3% in the city who are the most violent offenders, and we focused our attention on them as opposed to the dragnet policing that took place in the prior years. But at the same time, that has produced and given us the ability to keep crime coming down to the lowest levels that I referenced, as low as the crime at the time was in the 1950s, and we maintained that crime right up until several months ago when we started to see an uptick. But nevertheless, we are still fighting the lowest numbers of crime. So our focus is on constantly, we've gotten better at how we investigate crime. We've gotten better at the coordination of our efforts between our detectives and our NCOs and our sector officers and all of those entities that are on the street, our field investigation officers, and so forth, to help use that information, share intelligence, and be more effective in not only arresting and holding these individuals accountable through the arresting, but also working closely with our prosecutors to make better cases so that we can put the people who belong behind bars. So that's really been our focus.
Sure. And one last question quickly, tied in with that, the argument has been made that the recent round of significant budget cuts from the City Council to the NYPD has played a role in not having enough manpower to address crime, and that's a factor in rising crime. I tie that to, I guess, is a different kind of thing. The NYPD recently launched a listening tour to hear from the community on potential police reforms. Do you wish a collaborative approach like you're pursuing now had gone forward before making some of these more dramatic changes, most notably those budget cuts?
Well, I think the budget cuts are, listen, anytime you have budget cuts, it impacts our ability to be effective and do the work of keeping crime under control. So that's a challenge that we face. But so that's where we are right now in this moment, trying to deal with that, in terms of the challenges that the city budget faces. At the same time, we've managed to, even in under these situations, and even through COVID, when we had 7,000 officers out sick, we still managed to maintain the patrol strength to provide the kind of coverage on our streets that our citizens deserve. And so, you know, while we are not where we were in 1975, where we laid off 5,000 officers, that's a good thing. But we are certainly cognizant of the fact that the current budget crisis may be even more severe than it was back then. And so, you know, the city, the mayor's office, the city council, and others have to, you know, we all have to pay attention to that, you know, with the lack of revenue and the numbers of dollars that we've lost, and also just, I think, the pale and the heavy weight of the COVID situation, I think, exacerbates any problems that we've had. We've continued to, as a department, to really focus on all these mini crises that exist, and taken all together, they certainly are challenging. So it's certainly, budget is an issue, but we are, you know, committed to doing the work nevertheless, and trying to keep that together. On the other hand, in terms of resources, of course, you may or may not be aware that we postponed the last 3 classes that we were about to hire. We started to hire quarterly when I was running the training bureau. We spread the hiring out. Instead of large classes, we went to much more smaller, tried to moderate the number of officers in each group of people that we were hiring. And so, but we postponed the April class, we postponed the July class, and we postponed now the October class. And so there will be impact there at the same time as we are experiencing high attrition rates, higher than normal attrition rates as well in the department. So that impacts our head count. And the other thing is that because we're postponing these classes, the longer that we do that, certainly when we begin to hire again, we will still have some sort of a deficit in terms of reaching our full headcount strength. And we were at 36,000, just over 36,000 officers. We are now, you know, probably looking at about a 3,000 when you take the attrition combined with the deferral of roughly 2,000 officers that would have otherwise been in the academy at this moment. That creates you know, a serious concern for us.
Sure. Great. Thank you, First Deputy Commissioner. Unfortunately, we're out of time. That concludes our keynote segment. Now I'd like to bring on the panelists for our first panel. You can turn on your audio and video now. We'll get started momentarily with our panel discussion, New York's rapidly changing environment amid the coronavirus pandemic. Let me also note that we will take some audience questions at the end of this and the next panel. You can submit written questions by clicking on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. You can also give a thumbs up to any question you like. That'll bump it up to the top of the list. And the moderators will get to as many questions as they can, again, at the end of the discussion. I'd now like to turn it over to our moderator, Albert Fox-Kahn. He's the Executive Director, Surveillance Technology Oversight Project at the Urban Justice Center. Albert, over to you.
John, thank you so much. Thank you everyone for tuning in. Really looking forward to having this discussion. And so we'll just begin with some introductions for our panel. You'll see that we bring a lot of different viewpoints to the issues around cybersecurity, privacy, and the impact that COVID-19 is having on New York City. So Andrew Demara serves as the first Deputy Commissioner of the New York City Emergency Management Department. Prior to joining the department, Deputy Chief Demara coordinated the NYPD's response to large-scale events like New Year's Eve and in Times Square and Hurricanes Irene and Sandy. Patrick Murphy is the Commissioner of the New York State Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Services, a position he took up in 2019 after 41 years of military service. He served as the Director of the National Guard Bureau Joint Staff at the Pentagon, among many other postings. Tariq Habib is the Chief Information Security Officer at the MTA. He arrived at the agency in 1999 after serving first as Chief Technology Officer of Bridges and Tunnels, and before being promoted to the position. Mark McIntyre is a Senior Director at Microsoft. He helps US government agencies and private sector organizations implement secure cloud solutions. And lastly, Cass Halloway is the Head of Public Enterprise at Uncork. He's a former Deputy Mayor for New York City. He also worked at Bloomberg, Debevoise and Plimpton, and Cravath, Swain, and more. So welcome to our panel. I'd like to start off with a question for each of you, and we'll just go in order to avoid the usual Zoom overlap. So as you think about the numerous transitions that have occurred during this pandemic and the ways that we've seen people change how they shop, how they work, how they go about their lives, what for you specifically at your organization has been the most significant digital transformation of daily life? And I would ask that we first start with Andrew Demara, and then Patrick Murphy, and then Tariq.
Sure. Good afternoon, everybody. Just real quick, Commissioner Criswell sends regards and apologies. She had a last-minute conflict. But one of the biggest challenges that we've had, and I think that we've really come through, made a lot of progress, is when we have an activation of our Emergency Operations Center. As the coordinating agency for the city, it's important for us to have agencies represented, whether it's COVID or the last few storms that we had, or during heat season or power outages. And one of the challenges, like we're doing today, we're having Zoom, and but we've be able to use technology to our advantage, and it really has paid off using Microsoft Teams. And the first few times that we use it, we had to work through some bugs, but I think it's really showed that we could survive in this environment, the virtual environment, where most folks are at home. Most of our workforce is at home anyway, in the other agencies, and we were able to really coordinate rather well. I was rather surprised that we were able to be so efficient at it. So that's one of the things I think that we were able to accomplish and really see through over the last few months.
Thank you. And Patrick, to you next.
Yeah, so I think to echo some of what Andy had just presented, because we don't have the opportunity to work remote in all cases because of the technologies that existed at the start of the pandemic. As we moved into that, we were challenged to be able to have an environment, a safe environment for everybody to work in as we went forward. Now, we've adapted as we've gone along to be able to provide that safe environment, the distancing. We've learned that we can work remotely and still share the products that need to be used and assembled to be able to give to decision makers so that they can best move to the right target, and that's helped us a lot. But we were an agency specifically that has a fairly large field staff, and so we were able to continue operations fairly smoothly. I think the other part of this that I would just kind of throw out, and some will be able to relate to this, is much of what we do within the agency as well for the state as a whole are disaster management recovery operations. And those have typically been hands-on types of operations where we've had to engage the public, the municipalities, those that have had suffered injury, and we would go out and look at that damage and assess and be prepared to move forward with project submission and how we're going to recover and mitigate from those things. And we've used technology now to be able to do assessments, whether it be digital mapping or pulling together the projects remotely to be able to make determination of funding sources and funding streams. So I would just
And Mark and Cass, I want to turn to you next. Because you work in the private sector and serve a variety of clients, I wanted to ask you, to take a step back and look at the broader trends you're seeing here. What surprised you most about the sort of digital transition we've seen in this year as a result of COVID? And how is it aligned with what you saw with the broader trends towards remote work and remote service delivery, and how has it really defied expectations? I'll start with you, Mark, and then Cass.
Sure thing. Appreciate the opportunity very much. I'll separate my comments out maybe into how we within Microsoft as a company of 1,000 people around the world have been working the last several months, and then also externally. So, our CEO, Mr. Nadella, has made public comments recently about, how this pandemic has essentially consolidated, cudgeled 2 years of digital transformation into 2 months. And so in that sense, no doubt we're all having to react to this. Hopefully it's temporary. But I think on the other hand, what we are experiencing now, the ways that we're working now, they are, these are acceleration of trends that are already occurring, certainly within our company, certainly within how we try to enable, more creative, flexible work, work environments, telework, things like that. But also, for our customers around the world, including government organizations, more conservative, more regulated organizations. I will say that it's been in the news recently, for example, that we have announced, that we're going to have a more flexible work from home policy throughout the company going forward. However, our CEO is a bit more circumspect about that. He has talked also about, I think he used a term last week about too much working from home can give you the impression that you're sleeping at work, something to that effect. So I think we want to make sure that both for our employees and for our customers and partners that we're helping you find that balance. One thing I'll say in closing is that we're leaning heavily on data, literally in real time, looking at productivity, looking at the nature of our meetings that we might schedule, remote meetings, of course, how they're changing. For example, we're seeing more meetings come up, but they're shorter. We're trying to encourage people to do more, to use video so that we stay connected as colleagues. So I think, we'll keep adjusting our strategy. We'll keep figuring out, making sure that we provide, update our tools to our customers and partners, to match what we see going on for businesses, but also I think in the way that individuals work and the way that we individuals need to communicate and commiserate, with each other.
Certainly, and no shortage of things to commiserate about this year, unfortunately. And Cass, next to you.
Great. Thanks, Albert. And thank you to City and State for inviting me to participate in this. And I just wanted to say hi to Chief Demara, who I worked with closely in the city. And thank you, Commissioner Murphy, Chief Habib, Mark. But thank you, everyone in the city who is doing, I do have a sense of what I feel your pain. I did work I've spent more than half my life career working for New York City. And I'm now at a company, Uncork, that, just a minute about what we are. We're a platform to build applications without using code. What that means is that you can build these applications very quickly. What it enabled us to do when the COVID crisis really started to have its major impacts in March is respond very quickly to work with New York City, Washington, D.C., and some other places to help deploy solutions that really, just a few years ago wouldn't have been possible. One of the big ones that we have worked on is the food delivery, the New York City Get Food application. And that really is setting up a major operation. It's delivered more than 65 million meals It was kind of stood up overnight and now has continued for a number of months. And I think in terms of trends, what we have seen is the need to quickly virtualize experiences that before were entirely in person. And virtualization goes from end to end. So the trend of digitization was there. And some of the people on the phone, like the MTA, they have great applications, but it was always thought of in terms of just the subway rider or the citizen or the resident. And with COVID now, it's also the workforce. Everybody has to be able to work remotely. And you have to think about their interface, their connectivity, their ability to, do their jobs remotely. And so, I've been fortunate to actually be able to be kind of back in at least on in a limited way, helping to deliver some solutions that are achieving that. But overall, it's a trend that I think is going to continue in a big way.
Certainly. And I think one trend that we've seen with this broader move to working from home, working remotely, having fewer people working in physical offices is increasing numbers of points of vulnerability for attacks from a variety of malicious actors. Tariq had talked about this a bit. Some of you had also sort of started to address this point. I just wanted to hear more about what you're seeing within your organizations, with your clients across the city and the region in terms of changing threat profiles, whether it be increases in ransomware, novel forms of exploits, or even emerging uses of AI, such as deep fakes to fake someone's account credentials. So why don't we reverse the order this time, and then just start with Cass and Mark, and then Tariq, Patrick, and Andy.
Sure. Well, I will address security from the perspective of what's interesting. We're a cloud-based service, and the cloud for Microsoft, for so many companies, has been absolutely critical to the ability to deliver resilient services at scale. And the one thing I would say is, security is absolutely vital in terms of its protecting individuals, protecting information, but security also means resilience. And the ability to continue with multiple backups. And one thing that cloud, our platform, for example, is built with a security first mindset that we're servicing some of the largest financial institutions in the world, have been working with some on return to work on the commercial side with COVID. And part of the reason that they trust us is because the cloud, our environment, number one, is we're single tenant deployed, but we're also, we have, kind of passed all of the different security certifications, but you also crowdsource security. Vulnerabilities that are found all can immediately be addressed and benefit everyone who is servicing that environment, is part of those environments. So I would say that it's interesting and maybe a little counterintuitive, but the cloud, I think, is providing a new layer of security and vulnerability protection, which is a good thing.
So first of all, I'll put in the window of this call, make sure people have access to a report that we released, maybe I think it was last week, might have been the week before. It's called the Microsoft Digital Defense Report. Encourage everyone to look at it, find it. It's a summary of what we've discovered, what we've seen over the threat landscape of the last year. And so, but I think some of the key findings are very relevant here. We still see a lot of ransomware. We see a lot of timely, let's say, opportunity-driven attacks from nation-state actors, and even just from criminal groups. For example, COVID-specific attacks, which is, obviously very timely, very pernicious, I guess. And so, we see attackers being opportunistic. We see them take advantage of, commonly, or I should say, taking advantage of, let's say hygiene gaps in our collective infrastructure, the way that we run our operations around the world, we being the people all playing defense. So the good news is that there are a lot of more basic, let's say top 5, top 10 need to do is things that if we can all do better together, we can really help defend our organizations, our data, our people, infrastructure from these attackers.
So in MTA's case, I mean, I think the bad part is that what is it that we are not seeing, right? I mean, we feel really as an organization, and I think it's true for many of the government public type of entities, literally under siege is the word for us. And it's not one thing, 2 things, or 3 things, or top 5 things. It seems like that we have to worry about every aspect of technologies and systems that are affected because of this new paradigm, working from home model. So obviously the most obvious one that everybody gets to see is, we see rise in phishing attacks, and they are not necessarily, I guess the first 2 months, March, April, May timeframe, there were many COVID related themes. But now they have reverted back to, credential theft and, invoices and attacking the organization through their trusted business partners, emails coming from them, or internally, spoofing internal email accounts. So phishing is a big one for us. We also notice a lot of attempts on our perimeter, external, trying to exploit external vulnerabilities, primarily anything that's public facing. There is a great deal of scanning of our environment constantly going on from from some good sources, but mostly bad sources. We see activities for many nation states without naming them. I think everybody knows. We see significant activity that we see from spikes there. One day it's one country, another day it's another. So the extent of activity is just tremendous. I would say that maybe, I'll give you some number that we used to get close to 1 million or so, probing attempts per day. Now we are 10 times more. That every day we see, that many attempts within our environment to get into MTA's systems. But in general, in the end, I think it boils down to that these entities are there to steal accounts, credentials and passwords. And of course, ultimately, they want to get the data. We have seen an attempt where they're trying to disrupt the services. And one notable trend that we have seen that's become, very problematic for us. In MTA's case, we do business with thousands of companies. And what we are noticing is that our business partners are getting compromised. So every day, there is 1 or 2 entities that are compromised. And, either we find out through some law enforcement entity or through newspaper, or some of our tools alert us that, look, another business vendor is compromised. And the most common trend, in that space is really ransomware. That almost always these companies, and again, going back to the same theme, that these are generally sometimes smaller to mid-sized type of entities that I do not think they have enough of a cybersecurity team or resources in place to secure their infrastructure. And this work from home has really made it so much easier for these threat actors to target them. And of course, on our part, the concern is that if they're targeted, then they'll be coming after us either through them or indirectly or directly in a way.
So I would take it in. I'll take it in a little different direction from a state perspective, and within our agency, we have a cyber incident response team that is focused on municipalities and education, along with response. But we kind of break the networks into two groups. Really, there's the state network that where we executive agencies and health and others ride that network. And then we have the municipalities and school districts, other entities that have networks as well. The challenge for us is just to kind of put those two together. Are some of the municipalities have feeds into the state network. It could be a health network that feeds this larger kind of hub and spoke kind of vision, if you will. So just to kind of lay that as a framework, I'll switch it to where we have a little more responsibility, and that is out to the municipalities or those that are operating networks that may not have the resources. And in fact, there's so many of the networks that it's a part-time responsibility to be able to monitor and maintain a network. And the school districts themselves may not be a collective. They may be a standalone network as well in some cases. And so what's happened over time is if they're not doing all of those hygiene items, the backup or using the cloud or doing the things they need to with their network, they have vulnerabilities, and those vulnerabilities have been exploited. So what we saw over the last 18 months were all these ransomware issues that came up. I am sure, much like Tariq describes, literally probing and attacks, they may have been fended off in some way, but there are a number of them that are getting through. Some of the school districts will pay to get their data back, obviously, depending on how sophisticated the system is. They may have no choice. They may not have money to pay nor to get their information back. And so what we've done is tried to put a concerted effort together to educate and engage with those municipalities. Department of Education has their own systems that they work on, but we'll collaborate with that. And so I guess the question that you laid in front of us to begin with was, what do you see? And one of the things that we see in these softer networks, if you will, is this issue of ransom and ransomware and trying to get their data. I think we've come a long ways in the last 6 to 8 months. We have not had as many attacks, but I shouldn't say as many attacks because we don't know how many attacks we have particularly. What we do know is how many ransom are out there that we have to address. And so we've seen less of those than we did in the prior year moving forward. So I would leave you with that for your question.
Okay, so just to sort of sum it up, it is Cyber Awareness Security Month, so don't click on anything if you're not sure what it is. Public campaign, little infomercial. But the city has consolidated all their cyber security efforts into Cyber Command, NYC3. So, they are the city's defense. So all agencies, anything that comes through, they will be greatly fighting anything that comes. So there was some phishing. There was a lot of phishing actually a couple of months ago. So any kind of impacts, that's something that we would focus on in emergency management, any impacts as a result of those attacks. But Cyber Command has been a great resource for the city in fighting these attacks.
Thank you all so much. And just as a reminder for everyone who's watching, we will have a Q&A at the end of the panel. So please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to submit your questions for the panelists. So one thing I want to acknowledge is, we have representatives of city agencies, state agencies, and we know that throughout this pandemic, we haven't always seen complete alignment at the city and state level. Just in recent days, we've seen threats of defunding municipalities based off of elements of their COVID response. And so I wanted to ask where each of you saw an opportunity to better align